In 1960, deep within the Heishan Mountains of northeastern China, there stood an asylum that few people knew existed. Officially named Heishan Mental Rehabilitation Center, it was more commonly referred to by the locals as the Forgotten Asylum. The name was fitting over time. It had become a place not only forgotten by the outside world, but also by those who had the misfortune being sent there. The asylum had been built in the 1920s, originally intended to treat soldiers suffering from severe psychological trauma. Over the years, its purpose shifted, taking in patients with severe mental illnesses, many of whom were considered beyond help. By 1960, the facility was a relic, underfunded, understaffed, and largely ignored by the government. The head doctor, Dr. Liu Ming, was a man whose reputation was as enigmatic as it was unsettling. Rumors circulated among the villagers about his unconventional methods. Some said he was a visionary, while others whispered that he was a madman. What was clear, however, was that patients who entered the asylum rarely ever left, and those who did were never the same. In the autumn of 1960, a young woman named Mei Lan was admitted to the asylum. Mei had been showing signs of severe depression and paranoia, often speaking of shadows that followed her and voices that whispered in the night. Her family, unable to handle her worsening condition, sought help from the only place they knew, Heishan Asylum. The asylum was a bleak, foreboding place. The building was ancient, its walls cracked and peeling, and the windows barred, giving it the appearance of a prison more than a hospital. The air inside was stale, heavy with the smell of dampness and decay. Mei was placed in a small, cold room at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. The walls were bare, save for a single barred window that offered a view of the mountains, a view that should have been beautiful, but in this place felt more like a reminder of her isolation. Dr. Liu took a particular interest in Mei, though not in a way that brought her comfort. He insisted on treating her personally, subjecting her to treatments that were more experimental than therapeutic. Electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, and strange concoctions of herbs and chemicals that he claimed would cleanse her mind. Each session left her more disoriented and terrified than before. The other patients warned Mei to be careful, to resist Dr. Liu's methods as best she could. They spoke of strange occurrences, of patients disappearing in the night, of screams that echoed through the halls long after lights out. They told her about the night shift, a group of orderlies who only appeared after dark, their faces hidden beneath white masks. These orderlies, they claimed, were not human. They were spirits of former patients, trapped in the asylum, cursed to serve Dr. Liu forever. As the days passed, Mei's condition deteriorated. The voices grew louder, the shadows darker. She began to see things, figures lurking just out of sight, faces peering through the bars of her window at night. But the worst was the feeling of being watched, not just by Dr. Liu or the orderlies, but by something else, something ancient and malevolent that seemed to inhabit the very walls of the asylum. One night, Mei awoke to the sound of footsteps outside her door, heavy, deliberate footsteps. She held her breath, listening as they stopped just outside. The door creaked open, and in the dim light, she saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was one of the night shift orderlies, but something was different. The mask it wore was not white, but black, and its eyes were empty, hollow voids that seemed to suck the light from the room. The figure stepped inside, and Mei tried to scream, but no sound came out. She backed into the corner of her room, eyes wide with terror, as the figure slowly approached. It reached out a hand toward her, its fingers long and skeletal, and for a moment she was paralyzed with fear. Then, just as the hand was about to touch her, the figure stopped. It tilted its head as if listening to something, and then, without warning, it turned and left the room, the door slamming shut behind it. The next morning, when the regular orderlies came to check on her, they found Mei curled up in the corner, muttering to herself, her eyes vacant and unfocused. Dr. Liu was called, and he dismissed her condition as a severe psychotic episode, likely brought on by stress. He ordered that she be sedated and moved to a more secure room. But Mei knew the truth. Whatever had come to her that night was no hallucination. She had felt its presence, its cold, malevolent intent, and she knew it would return. Over the next few weeks, Mei's health continued to decline. She stopped eating, stopped speaking, her mind retreating further into itself with each passing day. The other patients noticed the change in her, how she no longer responded to their attempts to communicate, how her eyes seemed to always be focused on something just beyond the visible, something only she could see. Then, one night, Mei vanished. Her room was found empty, the door locked from the inside, with no sign of a struggle. The bars on her window were intact, and there were no footprints or disturbances in the surrounding area. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. Dr. Liu filed a report, stating that Mei had likely suffered a severe breakdown and wandered off into the mountains. Though this explanation did little to quell the fear among the remaining patients, they knew the truth. Mei had been taken, just like so many others before her. And the years that followed, the asylum's reputation grew darker, and more patients began to disappear under mysterious circumstances. By the early 1970s, Heishan Asylum was finally shut down by the government, its records sealed and its existence all but erased from history. The building was abandoned, left to decay in the mountains, a monument to the horrors that had occurred within its walls. But those who lived near the mountains claimed that the asylum was not truly abandoned. On certain nights, when the moon was full and the wind howled through the trees, they said you could still hear the screams of the patients carried on the wind. And sometimes, if you were unlucky, you might catch a glimpse of a figure in the shadows, wearing a black mask, with empty eyes that seemed to stare straight into your soul. To this day, the story of Heishan Asylum is told in whispers, a cautionary tale about the dangers of madness and the dark places where the human mind can be lost forever. And those who venture too close to the ruins are warned, beware the night shift, for they are always watching, always waiting, and once they find you, there is no escape.